Um, just so you know, and if you don't want to be in it, please turn your camera off. Otherwise, we would love to see you and have you be part of the conversation. Welcome to the webinar. We're the Climate Emergency Unit. My name is Anjali. I am one of the sectoral organizers at the Climate Emergency Unit. So happy to be here with my colleagues Seth and Emma. We would like to, I would like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people in Vancouver. I know that we're tuning in from all across the country, so please feel free to introduce yourself and whose territory you're calling in from in the chat. If you don't know whose territory you're calling in from, there's a very handy website called native-land.ca. And you can go to that and look at the pretty map and see whose territories that you're calling in from. So today we have a very informal conversation for you. I'm going to pass it to my colleague Seth in a minute. But first, the topic that we're here to discuss, this new cabinet shakeup. All three of us are very curious how everyone's feeling about it. So as you continue to put your intros in the chat, we want to throw up a quick poll just to capture everyone's sentiments right now. How are we feeling about this cabinet shakeup? You should see the poll right now. There's 4 options. This is really cool. This is like watching sports, seeing all your answers come in. We're having a lot of unsures. Hopefully by the end of this meeting, you might have a bit more clarity after hearing Seth's brilliant thoughts on some of these folks. Nice. Okay, so the poll, I don't know if you can all see the answers, but some of you are, about a third of you are optimistic, few are pessimistic, and most of you are, half of you are unsure. And I think that is totally fair. Oh, I can share the results. Yeah, there you can see it for yourself. And now I have a bit of a different question for you. So if you were to think about who you've seen go into different roles in this cabinet shakeup, a question for you to put the answer in the chat. Who do you think is most likely to surprise us by becoming the climate champion that we least expected? Think about your impressions of the cabinet so far and put your answer in the chat and let's see what you guys think. Who is most likely to surprise us by becoming the climate champion we least expected? If I'm going to be honest, I don't even know my answer to that question. Feel free to drop your answers in the chat. Someone says the new environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault. Seth has some thoughts on him that we'll hear from later. Yeah, possibly the new defense minister. Joyce Murray. I don't know about Joyce Murray. Jonathan Wilkinson. I do have a little bit of optimism for Jonathan Wilkinson for sure. Yeah. Okay, some optimism for Wilkinson. This is great. All right, now that we've got our juices flowing a little bit and we're thinking about these people and thinking about what they have the potential to do in the climate emergency, I am very happy to pass it off to my colleague Seth Klein, and he's going to share some thoughts with you about this new cabinet and what our hopes and dreams are as the climate emergency unit. So over to you, Seth.
Hi, everyone. Am I coming through okay? Well, lovely to see you all. Thanks for making time. And thank you, Anjali. Anjali, the best MP we didn't get, sadly. You would have been the best one there. this is intended to be this is going to be a short meeting. And really our purpose today was to share some initial observations and thoughts about the new cabinet members. And I should say we don't have their mandate letters yet. Often those come at the same time as the announcements, but this time they didn't. Hopefully they'll come in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, I suspect. And if you go to the website of the federal cabinet, usually they add them there right next to the bios for each of them. You can click on them and see the cabinet ministers' mandate letters. Those are really interesting to read, by the way, especially if you ever land a meeting with one of these people. It's always a good idea to read their mandate letter beforehand. The mandate letter is their job to-do list from the prime minister. And when you go into a meeting having read their mandate letter, you kind of know how to help them do their job and what their priorities are. The first thing I wanted to say is that regardless of your feelings about the outcome of the election, this is the hand we've been dealt, and this group of people in this cabinet in these crucial next few years. I suspect this is more or less the cabinet that we're going to have for the next 2 to 3 years, those crucial 2 to 3 years. And so part of what we want to try to figure out as a unit and with all of you is how do we make the most of this? And we want to start to think about, in particular, from that full list of cabinet ministers, there's 39 of them, who do we in particular want to meet with? And now, depending on where you are across the country, not everyone can get a meeting with a cabinet minister. However, some of you are constituents of some of these cabinet ministers, and you usually can get a meeting when you're one of their constituents. So that's the first thing I want to flag. The second thing is you may be somebody with expertise in the portfolio of these ministers. And then too, you often can get a meeting, especially if you're doing this with a few colleagues in that area. And in these days now that we're all on Zoom, often you can request and get a meeting with a cabinet minister regardless of where you are in the country, and you can do it over Zoom. I have, and you can as well. So we want to talk about who we want to meet with, and then what do we want to press on them to move them into emergency mode in these next few years. And in particular, as you know from following us in the Climate Emergency Unit, where we use this framework of the 4 or 5 markers of emergency, how can we apply the 4 markers to their portfolio? Because again, one of the things we want to do is help them do their job, and to do some visioning with them about, if you are truly ready to be in emergency mode and this happens to be your portfolio, here's what it would look like to be in emergency mode given your portfolio. So I'm going to offer up a few examples of that, and I'm going to walk you through not the whole cabinet, but one of the important points here is that this isn't just a matter for the minister responsible for climate change. This is a whole of government approach, and so many of the ministers have portfolios relevant to all of us who care about the climate emergency. I'm going to run you through some of those, but don't worry, this call isn't going to be just me musing about some of these people. We are going to have some concrete asks for you before we let you go at the end of the half hour. So Emma's going to screen share a list of some of these people. But actually, before we do, Emma, some overall observations. In that poll, I think I'm where most of you are, somewhere between unsure and optimistic, cautiously optimistic. It does feel like in the construction of this cabinet, and as many of you will have seen in the media analysis already, the government trying to figure out how to emphasize climate. And in particular, if this is the last government for the current prime minister, how do you leave a legacy on this file in particular? And that's something we might be able to build on. On 2 of the key files, I'm actually, I think there's some good news here. So maybe let's call up the list of them now, Emma. So the Minister for Environment and Climate Change is now Stephen Guilbeault from Montreal. And, you know, when I look at that whole roster of possibilities for this cabinet, and if I were to ask myself, you know, who would I most want to see of that lot to be the lead minister for climate change, it would have been Stephen Guilbeault. I think this is as good as it gets. He's somebody who comes from the climate movement, as many of you will know. He's one of the co-founders of Équiterre, which is the largest environment group in Quebec. He worked for many years as a campaigner with Greenpeace. I mean, this guy has hung off the CN Tower for climate, which is something I certainly wouldn't have the guts to do. So he knows about the issue and spent most of his adult life working on this issue, and that's certainly something to work with. The previous minister responsible for climate change is Jonathan Wilkinson, and he shifts over to the Ministry of Natural Resources, the Department of Natural Resources. I think that's good news too. I think Wilkinson is someone who does get climate. He's not the most charismatic, just because we're 100 folks among friends here. I will just say, not the most charismatic person to have led the climate file. But having him move over to what's arguably the other most important ministry here, natural resources, is a good move. Historically, the Minister of Natural Resources has been quite captured by the oil and gas industry. Certainly the last minister, Seamus O'Regan, was. And so if Wilkinson can bring a renewed climate focus to that ministry and work in partnership with Guilbeault, there's some promise there. He is the person who will need to, I guess the surprise new commitment from the Liberals in this last election was that they would bring in a cap on oil and gas emissions. And it will now fall to Wilkinson to actually implement that. And so for those of you who live on the North Shore of Vancouver, and I know there are some of you on the call who do, for whom he is your minister, you should be seeking a meeting to talk about that. Moving down, arguably though, the other most important of these ministers is the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. She's a bit of an unknown on climate. She's not someone who's distinguished herself on the climate file. She is, however, somebody who I think demonstrated in the pandemic that she's prepared to spend money in the face of an emergency. And that's something I think we need to build on. As you all know from our 4 markers, the first one is spend what it takes to win. And whether or not that happens is in her hands. We often talk about how if we were to take the advice of Nicholas Stern, countries should be spending 2% of GDP specifically on climate investments and actions. In Canada, that would be about $40 billion a year. And that falls to Ms. Freeland. 40 billion sounds like a lot of money. I will point this out. In the whole first year of the pandemic, the Bank of Canada was buying up federal government securities in order to finance the emergency response to the tune of $5 billion a week for a year. So $40 billion means we're saying to Chrystia Freeland, what you did for the pandemic for an entire year, if you just did that for 8 weeks a year, we could change this country. But issues around new crown corporations would come under her. The idea that you've heard us talk about before about a new federal just transition transfer, that would fall to her. The whole role of the Bank of Canada in helping to finance this falls to her. I'm going to go much quicker now through a few of the other ones. Marie-Claude Bibeau remains as Minister of Agriculture. That's another huge area of emissions, super important. She's from Stansted, Quebec. So for those of you in Quebec, she would be somebody to meet with. Dominique Leblanc from New Brunswick, if any of you are there, he's got a very important file. Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Infrastructure and Communities. So he takes the portfolio that Catherine McKenna had until this election. So much of the climate infrastructure that has to happen falls to him, transit infrastructure, renewable energy, rapid rail, housing, and even the whole question of a new federal just transition transfer, that's an intergovernmental affairs matter. So he's really important. We put Harjit Sajjan here, the former Minister of Defense who got demoted to international development. For those of us in BC, he's somebody in the Vancouver area that we might want to meet with. Because of he now has international development. During the COP over the next 2 weeks, this is going to be a big issue. The fact that the wealthier countries of the world have failed to ante up what they were told, what they committed to ante up to help pay for climate mitigation and adaptation in poor countries. Canada's fair share of that 100 billion a year commitment is estimated to be about 4.75 billion a year, given our historic emissions. But so far, the Trudeau government has only committed a little over 5 billion over 5 years, so about 1 billion a year, rather than 4.75. So fixing that falls to him. Carla Qualtrough, also for those of us in the greater Vancouver area, I believe she's from Richmond, is the employment minister. So again, just transition and a really robust just transition plan would fall to her. Patty Hajdu moves from health to Minister for Indigenous Services. Because a robust Green New Deal needs to include housing and clean water in Indigenous communities and renewable energy in Indigenous communities so that they can get off diesel and that kind of thing. That all falls to her. By the way, just an interesting aside about Patty Hajdu, you all know how in my book, the central role of C.D. Howe, she represents C.D. Howe's old riding in what's now Thunder Bay. Next on the list, François Philippe Champagne he was Foreign Affairs, now he's the Minister for Innovation, Science and Industry, if any of you are in Quebec. So the whole idea of new crown corporations to achieve the speed and scale of the transition that we need, that would fall to him. Ahmed Hussain in York South, in the Greater Toronto area, is housing. So we need a Green New Deal for housing. We still have Seamus O'Regan here, if any of you are from Newfoundland. He's now Minister of Labor. So even he initiated a lot of the consultations on just transition in his previous portfolio. Maybe he has a continuing role in that as Minister of Labor. Pablo Rodriguez, Honoré Mercier in the Montreal area, he actually has had this file before in the past, but is again the Minister for Heritage and Culture. This is a really important one for our unit. As you may know, Anjali and Anthony, one of our other team members, are working with this whole national sectoral table, trying to bring together arts and culture groups with a 4-marker agenda for the arts and culture sector. What about getting the CBC to do its job and tell the truth? What about special funding for the Canada Council of the Arts to invite artists to join us in rallying the public in the climate emergency? What about banning fossil fuel advertising? What about having a climate emergency information board like we had in the war? All of that could fall to this guy if we could convince him that he actually holds a very important portfolio in heritage and culture if he's ready to meet this emergency moment with us. Mary Ng is from Markham, Thornhill. I know some of you are in that neck of the woods. So she's the Minister of Trade and Export and Small Business, but in particular, the fact that Export Development Canada continues to finance fossil fuel projects in other countries, that has to end. That falls to her. Philomena Tassi is the Public Services and Procurement Minister. So she represents Hamilton West Dundas, if any of you are there. So Crown Corporations, she'd be the person particularly who needs to ensure that the federal government itself is changing its operations to meet this moment. And so she's worth engaging. Joyce Murray, again, for those of us in the Vancouver area, has fisheries and oceans and aquaculture. What about a whole new industry around seaweed and kelp production? It's something that some of you have probably followed. That would fall to her. Not on this list, but I'll flag Marco Mendocino is public safety and emergency preparedness. So that's another one. And then Omar Alagabra from Mississauga is transport. And of course, transport is another key one, whether it's mode shifting or rail or zero emission vehicles or marine and air, that's all him. So that's the end of the list. But you start to see that with any of these people, there's an important conversation to be had about, someone's holding up the sign energy. So that would come under natural resources and Wilkinson still. There's an important conversation to be had with them about, if you're ready to meet this emergency moment and apply the 4 markers, let's talk about what they mean for your portfolio. So that's all I was going to say about who we've got, but we also have some concrete asks and recommendations for you. So the first thing is, if I have mentioned anyone and you live in their riding, you are one of their constituents, I would encourage you to seek a meeting. If you do, I and the unit will help you before your meeting. We can chat about what does the 4 markers mean for them, and try to help prep you ahead of that meeting. We would be keen to do that. If you are an expert in their portfolio and you want to seek a meeting, same thing. And if you are successful, we want to hear from you. We want to help you prepare for that meeting. Now, most of you, because there are 338 ridings in this country, don't live in one of their ridings. So it's important to meet with all of our MPs still, but in particular, there's one ask that we have for you today, which is the Finance Minister, Krista Freeland, needs to hear from all of us. And so Emma's going to put in the chat right now her email and phone number. And we would invite you to send her a personal note to say what your hopes are, and float some of the ideas that I mentioned, that the key to winning this fight of our lives is to spend what it takes to win. We need to be spending about $40 billion a year directly on climate investments. Make it personal. Talk about why this is an important issue to you and what your major concerns are. So there you see in the chat from Emma, Krista Freeland's email and phone and office phone number. Second ask, or the third ask, I guess. First, get a meeting, email the Finance Minister. Our friends at Lead.
Thanks, Sarah. I just want to interject and let everyone know, as they're furiously writing down the contact information and the links, we will email them out afterwards. So don't worry.
Okay.
Thanks.
But you can also paste it if you want out of the chat, cut and paste it out of the chat. Our friends at Lead Now just yesterday created a nice tool where you can send a single email message to the whole cabinet. So it's not to each of them individually, but rather to all of them. Again, they have a sample letter, but you can modify. In fact, you're encouraged to modify the letter and talk about what your hopes are for them. And so I think Emma is going to put the link in the chat for that Lead Now tool as well. And then, as many of you will know, and some of you will have attended, our friends at the Council of Canadians have this whole Code Red campaign around pressuring all of the individual MPs. And I think Emma is going to pop on now and actually say something about the Code Red campaign.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to give a shout out to Sanjeev, who pointed out there's probably a better email for Chrystia Freeland. So if anyone finds it and drops it in the chat, that would be great. If not, I'll include it in the email that we send out afterwards. That's why we work together. We're a team, right? So the Code Red petition, it's part of the Code Red Week of Action that the Council of Canadians put together. It's a micro petition tactic to get the attention of MPs across the country. It was launched 2 or 3 weeks ago, and some of you might have already been taking part in it, but the intention is that you get 25 people to sign a real paper petition, and that's the minimum amount of signatures for an MP to table it in the House of Commons. So then you take your petition to your MP and you ask them for a meeting to talk about the just transition, to talk about climate action. And that's a great opportunity for you to build a relationship with their MP. We talked to one person in Atlantic Canada who said that their MP only had heard about climate change from their constituents 4 years ago. They really don't hear a whole lot from us around climate change. Maybe some of you talk to your MPs all the time, but many don't. So this is just a great opportunity to be part of a bigger just transition ask, and you use it as a tool to meet with your MP.
Great, thanks, Emma. You're going to keep hearing from us over the next few weeks. Once those mandate letters come out, we'll be trying to do some analysis on the mandate letters. You're also going to get an invite in the next few days for another event like this but if you want to go ahead and put it in your calendars, it's going to be on November 9th. And it's going to be a report from COP, because Anjali, who you heard from at the top, and one of our other team members, Flossie Baker, in their capacities, they work a little bit with the unit, but mostly with Sierra Club BC, and they are going to the COP with the delegation of First Nations leaders from British Columbia. And so they're going to phone in on the 9th with give us all a live report directly from those UN meetings. But the main thing is that we are wanting to do more organizing with you sectorally, so that we can continue to pressure these cabinet ministers and organize and build some political muscle from different constituencies that they are responsible for. So you're going to be getting an email later tonight. It's not just going to all of you, but everyone on our list. But it's going to include a survey. And we're asking you to fill it out. I know people have some trepidation. The key information that we're trying to get in the survey are, first of all, what riding are you in? Now, all of you on this call have already answered that. You had to answer that when you registered, but this is going to a much larger list, a bunch of whom haven't answered that yet. So apologies for that repetition, but that's why it's there. But the second question is there a key sector in which you are engaged in your life, either in your personal life or in your work life? Faith sector, food and agriculture, first responders, youth, health, arts and culture, buildings, because we need you to identify if you're active in one of those areas. And then you're going to hear from us as we try to convene you in your respective sectors to do some strategizing about how we build political pressure on the relevant ministers, federally, provincially, and on those files. Somebody just shared, Joe Gunn just shared in the chat that the CCPA also releases the alternative federal budget on November 9th. I should have known that as a former CCPA person, but I didn't. So thank you for that, Joe. And that's what you're going to be hearing from us. Those are our asks. Seek those meetings, email or
Has everyone else lost that?
are you not hearing me anymore? You are.
You're good.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I guess it looks like my internet's not stable, but that's fine because I'm finished. That's all that's everything I had to say. But it was so good to see you all.
I wonder if you can hang on for a few minutes to answer a few questions that came up in the chat. There's only a few, so there's a few that I'm going to group together. You and I discussed earlier today the fact that we chose some specific MPs to focus on, but several different people have mentioned in the chat others that we might think about, like Karen Gould, families and families and climate effects on children and their future, for Carolyn Bennett in terms of eco-anxiety, the Minister of Defense. So maybe you can talk a little bit to whether it's worth reaching out to those ministers, even if they're not on our list.
I think absolutely. Yeah, thanks for pointing all of those out. Those are excellent twists on the relevance of people's files to this moment. If you are fortunate enough to live in a riding where your MP is a cabinet minister, then whether or not they were on my list, seek out a meeting. I mean, the truth of the matter is the cabinet as a whole will be having to make key decisions about how ambitious they're prepared to be. And the more people around that table are feeling the pressure, the better. But also some of the ministries that you're flagging, I mean, the truth is, if we really want a Green New Deal, this is about more than just climate. There's all kinds of social justice and equity issues and the caring economy and so many pieces of this. I'm hard pressed to think of a cabinet minister with whom there is not a relevant conversation to be had.
Thanks, Seth. There's another one here from J. Davy Milstein. There's about 4 questions in one, so I'm going to read them all quickly. Would Jonathan Wilkinson be the best person to reach out to regarding resource agreements for green infrastructure development, or would I need to reach out to multiple ministers? Should Wilkinson be involved in files regarding resource application or just extraction?
I'm not hugely expert on this. In general, I would say if it's an infrastructure project, it's more likely Dominique LeBlanc. But if it's infrastructure related to energy, or then it may well be Wilkinson.
And one last quick question. Can you talk about the mandate letters? Someone asked where we find those.
Right, so you can't find them yet. We don't know when they're going to be published, but it will be sometime before the throne speech. And by the way, we do know when the throne speech is. It's going to be the 22nd of November. So sometime between now and then. Right now, if you just Google, Canadian cabinet, you're going to get a website, from the government webpage, a website that lists the new cabinet ministers and has little bios for each of them. Once the mandate letters are published, they'll usually put a link to each person's mandate letter right by their photo. And typically, from past experience, there's a chunk of the mandate letter that's the same for every cabinet minister. That really highlights the overarching goals of government, and climate's certain to be there. And I'm sure reconciliation will also be there. And so this is where, these are the marching orders that they all get. So this is where they're told, this is our government's priority. And then there's a sort of second half of each mandate letter that is specific to each minister, given their portfolio. And basically, the mandate letters tell you of all of the promises that the government made in the election, this is where you see who's responsible for actually implementing.
I don't see any other questions coming through other than suggestions of MPs we can chat with.
I see Tim asking which new Crown corporations. Well, look,
oh, good.
Tim, you're going to have to read the book because there's a 3-page list of Crown corporations. I mean, once you get going, there's no end of new Crown corporations. We need to expedite this transition at speed and scale. I think it's on page 300. I might be wrong. I think that there's a 3-page list of them. Not that I'm selling books, but there you go.
Great. Okay. Well, now that I've said that we don't have any more questions, they're rolling in. So there's a question about how to deal with the misconceptions about natural gas, which I think you have addressed really well before, Seth.
Well, natural is a really great PR name. It's a fossil fuel. Increasingly in Canada, almost 90% of it is fracked, and its methane leaks. It's methane, which is an incredibly potent fossil fuel, particularly so when it's leaked, as it frequently is. You know, one could have made a possible argument 30 years ago for natural gas as a bridge fuel in this transition. The bridge was to now. We're here. We've run out the clock, and we don't have any room for it anymore.
Thanks, Seth. So we'll just do 2 more questions. One of them was about making sure every MP has a book and where every minister has a book. And Mary Jane Phelps has taken care of that with the last cabinet. She made sure every MP has a book. Thanks, MJ. I think you're on this call today, but we do want to make sure the new MPs have one. So that's a great question. And there was a question here about working with the opposition. There's 2 questions and I'll combine them into one just because of time limits. A question about working with opposition, and someone specifically asked about the NDP as well.
Yeah, well, it's a minority parliament. And so the other parties matter. And in particular, you know, unlike the last parliament, the combined votes of the Liberals and the NDP get a majority. So the NDP is going to figure centrally in this. So, you know, if your MP is an NDP MP, we need the NDP to prioritize the climate emergency in its negotiations and dealing with this government. And at every opportunity, they need to be pressing for increased ambition. And because it's a minority government, every time there's a confidence motion, but in particular, that includes a vote to accept a speech for the throne and a budget, is a new opening to press for more from all of us, and pressing the NDP to articulate that. So 2 or 3 times a year, we have an opening in this minority parliament to work with those opposition members and demand more.
The questions keep flowing. This is great. You know, we had internally planned to end this meeting after a half hour. And I'm just checking in. I said I'd take 2 more questions. Seth, do you have the time to do one more?
Yeah, let's try to wrap it. It's you know, for those of us in BC, it's only a little after 5, but for Emma, who's running the show here, it's 4 hours later. So let's hold it to 2 more and then move along.
Okay, so 2 more now. Okay. So there was a question about working with the Conservatives, and I encouraged at least one person to email me about it so we can chat. I should point out, with the Code Red petition that I mentioned earlier, our director of organizing, Tracy Maynard, and myself and Robin Tress, the organizer from Council of Canadians, we hosted 2 workshops around how to meet with your MPs, and they're recorded and on the CEU's webpage. So if that's of interest to folks, we can chat you through how to meet with some of the MPs that are more challenging. We had a whole Conservative breakout group. So we have
actually, if I may,
yeah.
I mean, if some of you are in Quebec, the Bloc MPs are also very important in all of this. Just so you know, a lot of your MPs have read the book, and we've started to engage with them. I should have said this off the top, but I have met with Stephen Guilbeault when the book first came out last November. We had a great chat for about an hour. Turns out he's a bit of a World War II buff on top of everything. I have met with Jonathan Wilkinson about it. And just yesterday, actually, I was invited to brief Jagmeet Singh on a lot of these ideas, because he's going to COP and was seeking some advice about how they should be pressing for more. So the openings are there. We just have to keep taking them and demanding them.
Sure, I'm trying to keep up here. I see Laurie's concern about the Council of Canadians petition. I've talked to them. It's been approved by the clerk, so they had it approved before they printed it. I think I don't see any other questions here. I'm sorry if I missed your question. There's a lot of great chat happening. So I appreciate everyone's engagement. It's wonderful to be able to talk with you all and hear what your thoughts are. Do you want to close it up, Seth or Anne?
I guess that's, yeah, I just want to thank you all. Thank you for your interest. Please stay engaged. Please fill out the survey when you get the email from us. And we'll try to keep organizing together.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
And everyone.